Hello, good morning, and welcome to this first live for me actually in 2026. My name is Anuska. For those of you who don't know me, welcome. Very exciting to be back. And I just thought I've been waiting for the right topic to do a live because sometimes it's easier to do certain topics in a live format than others. So welcome. If you're watching me live, please feel free to leave a comment. If you're watching the replay, please feel free to leave a comment below. I meant actually it's comment, isn't it? Chat, whatever it's called. Anyway, the chat box, the comment box, please feel free to leave a comment or leave me a message in the chat. So today I am talking about this topic of being talkative, which is really interesting. And if any of you know anything about my work, you know that I always go deeper. I go beyond the kind of the voice training side of things, the voice physiology, the vocal technique side. For me, what is more interesting is always what's driving a voice in the first place, because actually that's where everything starts. So do you perceive yourself to be someone that's quite reserved? Maybe you speak quite softly. Maybe you speak quietly. Maybe you are introverted. And maybe kind of uncommunicative. And by uncommunicative, I mean you only really speak when it's absolutely necessary. So actually, before I continue, I just want to say that there's nothing inherently wrong with either of these. I'm just going to talk about these in the two extremes today. So first of all, the reserved side of things. So do you feel like you're on that reserved side? I did put a poll out yesterday or the day before, and most people that seem to watch my channel are more on the reserved end, which actually makes sense to me. Or do you feel like you're on the other side of the spectrum, so to speak, that you're quite chatty, very gregarious, very comfortable talking to people? You maybe even consider yourself to be more of an extrovert, gregarious, all of that stuff. So what side of the fence do you kind of perceive yourself to be on? Again, there's no right or wrong. This is not about judging yourself. I should be more this, I should be more that. It's more, as we're going to get to in today's live, where you're kind of holding yourself back by perhaps holding on to a particular identity. Because a lot of this work is really about the identity that we are attached to. So I want to share something first of all. I'm going to see if I can get this to work. Add to stage. There we go. And this is from, I'm not taking credit for this, by the way. So Dr. Robert Bastian is a prominent laryngologist. I think he's in, I want to say Chicago. He's actually got his own YouTube channel. So if you're interested in the kind of more vocal technique, vocal health side of things, do check out his channel. And he developed this talkative scale for what he was seeing in his practice with patients. And so as you can see on the left-hand side, we've got what he calls the vocal underdoer. So these are people that, as we said, maybe perceive themselves to be more reserved and not so communicative. And then on the other side of the fence, he's got what he calls vocal overdoers, the talkative, chatty people. And he realized that with people that were coming into his practice, there were patterns in voice problems depending on what side of the fence you feel you fall into. And he called them vocal underdoers for people that don't feel they talk that much, and vocal overdoers. Now, typically, when we think about voice problems, and maybe you haven't thought about this, maybe you don't perceive you have a voice problem, quote unquote, but when we think about voice problems, and often the reason people will seek someone like Dr. Bastian out is because they fall into the vocal overdoer category. So it's things like nodules and polyps and maybe a vocal hemorrhage and vocal fatigue, but from a kind of mucosal lining perspective. So just quickly, the lining of the vocal folds is a bit like the lining of your cheeks. And there's a kind of mucosal lining that needs to be kept moist. And when we overdo our voice, that can get very inflamed. And so we call that kind of vocal fatigue, but mucosal vocal fatigue. And often with these kinds of people, the reason they get these problems is because they're shouting, they're yelling, they're speaking really loudly, they're pushing their voice constantly, they're talking for hours. And so invariably, particularly if they don't have any vocal skill around their voice, they can end up creating these more serious issues like nodules and polyps and hemorrhage and things like that. So he started to see that people that fell into those categories were people that generally consider themselves talkative. And as I said, I think often in the voice world, we think of, well, they're the people that have the voice problems, the people that use their voice excessively. But what I want to talk about today, which I think, as I said, probably actually resonates with more of my channel, the people that watch my channel, is the people that might consider themselves to be more reserved. And he also started to see there were voice problems associated with people that were vocal underdoers, that didn't really use their voice. And which might sound a little bit paradoxical, because you're like, well, if I don't use my voice, why would I have any voice problems? Which I get it makes sense, but we're going to talk about that in a minute. So let's just talk about the vocal underdoer today. That's what I really want to focus on, because I think, as I said, this is what's not typically talked about. So this is the person, as I said, who perceives themselves to be reserved, at the reserved end of the spectrum, like quiet, softly spoken, uncommunicative, taciturn, introverted. Also, I think often with these people, when they speak, there's not a lot of energy in the voice. It's kind of fairly flat, can be quite monotonous. Voice can often be sitting at the back of the throat. So there's not a lot of energy. There's not a lot of melody. There's not a lot of engagement in the voice. It's really, I guess, as I said, speaking for the sake of speaking. I need to speak to communicate. So that's the only reason I'm speaking. I'm not really speaking because I need to speak. And so typically these people will prefer not to speak at all, and they're more likely to send you an email or a text message than pick up the phone or leave you a voice note. So what's interesting with these kinds of people, which we're going to call vocal underdoers, is that when you fall into that side of the fence, when you consider yourself to be more a vocal underdoer, someone that doesn't speak that much, I can guarantee, actually, let me just get rid of this. I don't need this anymore. I can guarantee on some level, you've probably chosen a career that allows you to maintain that habit. So, and I see this a lot with the private clients I work with. Again, there's no judgment here. This is purely to actually bring to awareness what's going on for you with your voice. So typically when people are in this kind of vocal underdoer, more reserved end of the spectrum with speech and communication, they're going to pick jobs that don't require them to speak. Now, this may be very unconscious, or it may be conscious decision. Like, I don't really want to have to speak to people. I don't want to have to deal with people. So you might find you fall into maybe being an accountant or a computer programmer or an engineer, where, you know, it's a lot about being in your own space, in your own thoughts, in your own world. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. But what we're going to be looking at today is, if it's not a conscious choice, if you're doing it because you're trying to avoid something, that's when it becomes an issue. So just start to think, is that you? What kind of career have you chosen? Does it allow you to reinforce that vocal habit that I like to talk or I don't like to talk? The other thing which I find really interesting is often when people don't really like speaking or would consider themselves reserved, they pick partners that like to speak. I remember, and I'm not going to mention any names in case she's watching, but I remember a particular friend of mine when I was living in Melbourne, the chattiest, most gregarious person ever. And her husband literally said nothing. And it was like pulling teeth trying to get any conversation out of him. And I remember at the time, this was a while ago, and I remember thinking, I don't understand how this relationship works. Like, it would drive me mad if I was in a relationship with someone that never said anything, because she's so chatty. But now I kind of have come to understand the psychology around this. And it's really about the shadow. So we unconsciously pick partners that are actually those parts of ourselves that we don't really want to adopt. So in the case of her being very talkative, she picks a partner that's more reserved. And this isn't conscious. We don't do this consciously. Sometimes we might, but most of the time we're picking a partner for other reasons. And so this happens all the time in relationships. We pick partners that have those personality traits that we don't perceive that we have. But the truth is we do have them. They're our shadow, and that's what I want to talk about in a bit. So again, start to think about in terms of your career. Have you picked a career which allows you not to speak much, if any, at all? Have you picked a partner? Do you pick friends? Are you around people that do the kind of social heavy lifting? So you go to a dinner party, you go to a party, you're with your partner, you're with your friends. They're very outgoing, so they make the conversation. It allows you to not speak. And again, this is just all information. This is not about judging yourself, but just start to notice. Now then, with people that don't really speak very much and more reserved, obviously at some point you are going to have to speak. You know, at some point you are going to have to maybe present, maybe it's a wedding speech, you know, who knows? There's going to be a time when you are going to have to present or speak, etc., in front of other people. And so what happens with these people, which is what Dr. Bastian was looking at, is they actually are more likely to suffer with vocal fatigue. And vocal fatigue, I mean in the muscular sense of the term, not the mucosal sense, which I talked about before. And when you speak, then you're having to really push and force the voice out. You're going to really struggle to project. And often these people as well have a sort of real confused relationship with the sense of volume in their voice. So they think they're speaking loudly, but they're really not. And you might find that people keep telling you to speak up and you're like, I am speaking up, but you're not, because the voice just isn't functioning properly. And so here with the vocal underdoer, the muscles are just underutilized, they're under-conditioned, and they just haven't got the strength. So they haven't got the strength to produce the sound effortlessly, freely, easily. And so you end up pushing, straining, forcing the voice in those moments when you do have to speak. And so as Dr. Bastian was finding, those are the people that present often with a lot of issues with vocal fatigue. So if you resonate with this, does that ring a bell? Do you feel like, okay, I don't really speak that much, but when I do have to speak, it feels like really hard work. My voice feels heavy. It feels effortful. I feel like I'm sort of choking when I speak. I feel like maybe you feel like there's just a kind of weight on your voice, like the voice just doesn't come out freely. Now, before I continue, I just want to say as well that whether you fall into the vocal underdoer or the vocal overdoer camp category, this doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have voice problems. I just want to make that really clear. It's not all vocal underdoers are going to have vocal fatigue and all vocal overdoers are going to have nodules. It's more that these are the tendencies. So there's lots of things that would contribute to voice problems. Sometimes people have just got a stronger constitution than other people. Like I've seen this myself. Some people can just abuse their body and their body just seems to bounce back. They can abuse their voice and their voice seems to bounce back. Other people, they speak for perhaps a longer period of time at high volume and they lose their voice completely. So to some extent, this is kind of genetics. It's your constitution, your physical body kind of constitution, your general kind of vocal health. But also a big part of this would be, your ability to produce sound with ease and effortlessness, which comes from voice training. So, for example, if you're someone that's got a highly trained voice, but you don't speak very often, then you probably won't have these problems. Maybe you do spend long periods of time being quiet, but because your voice is highly trained and maybe you do some things privately at home and then occasionally you speak, but you don't have the same problems. Here I'm talking about people who don't have any training around their voice, don't use their voice very much, and then occasionally have to speak and then feel like they've got to kind of overcompensate. And I would probably argue that's probably where most people are, but I just wanted to make that really clear. I'm not saying that you would have voice problems. Also, sometimes you might have problems brewing, but you don't realize, and you might be ignoring them as well. So sometimes it takes something quite catastrophic for people to realize there's a problem with their voice. Like they completely lose their voice, for example, or the voice becomes incredibly husky, incredibly croaky. And then they're like, okay, well, there's something going on. I've had this for like 2 weeks. It's not improving. So the voice is very resilient. I mean, the body's very resilient in most of us, some people more than others. So the voice can take quite a lot before it will start to actually, scream at you, pardon the pun, in whatever way it can. So why does this matter? Because you might think, well, who cares if I'm reserved? I've got my nice quiet life. I live in my little bubble. I do my job. I go to work, my 9 to 5. I come home. I've got my partner that likes to speak and I let them do the speaking. And I've got my nice little world set up. Well, you are living in a very limited space and truly you're not free. And this is where the deeper sort of psychology work comes in, because it's actually really your conditioning that's driving your voice, that's driving your career choices, that's driving your relationship choices. You're not actually consciously making a choice of I want this career or I want this kind of partner. It's the conditioning. What you've learned is socially adaptive. What you've learned will keep you safe. And so for a lot of people, when this is a strong identity, I'm an introvert. I'm just softly spoken. I'm just quiet. I just don't like talking. I hear this all the time. It's an identity that you bought into because it kept you safe at some point. And interestingly, as I mentioned before, a lot of the private clients I work with actually fall into this more kind of quote unquote reserved end of speaking. And the reason they come to me is they realize how it might take them 40 years, but they realize it's actually now limiting them. It's limiting them in their career. I mean, again, I'm not mentioning any names here, but I worked with a lady that was an engineer for a company in the US. And, it's the stereotypical voice problems that we see with people that don't speak very often. But she really she was very ambitious. And I think she got to a point where she's like, actually, do you know what? I want to do more public speaking now. I've lived sort of hiding behind my desk all this time, and I want to do more public speaking. I want to be better at communicating. So I have worked with a lot of people in these careers where accountants, again, that, in that kind of space where a lot of the time they don't really need to speak to anyone. So what you will find is at some point, and maybe not now, but maybe in 5 years, 10 years, you're going to start to hit a wall. You're going to feel quite limited because you're trying to keep yourself in a box. You're trying to keep yourself in a prison, but there's a part of you that wants something more. You want more growth. You want perhaps more fulfilling relationships. You want a more fulfilling career. Perhaps you've got a burning desire to do something, but because it doesn't fit with that persona of being reserved, it's like, well, I can't do that. I'd actually really love to go and stand on stage and speak, or I'd love to start a podcast, fill in the blank. I'd love to run a team in my company. But because it doesn't fit with the persona of being quiet and softly spoken and reserved and uncommunicative, I can't do it. So a lot of the clients I end up working with fall into this category, and they've just realized that they're not free. They're just surviving, essentially, which is, let's be honest, that's where most of us are until we wake up. We're totally in survival mode. And so if you perceive yourself to be naturally reserved, then that's the lens with which you will view the world. Everything becomes around trying to maintain this identity, trying to maintain this persona at all costs. So as I say, you're not free. You might consciously think you're free, but you're not. You might consciously think you're making choices, but you're not really. You're being driven by conditioning. So let me just see, hold on, I've got a few points in front of me. And now, as I said at the start, there's actually nothing wrong with being reserved or quiet. Again, I'm not making anything wrong, whether you're chatty, whether you're not chatty, it's all neutral. But it's when you need that, when there's a fear around being anything but that, that's when it becomes a problem. That's when it becomes limiting. I just want to tell you a little bit about myself and my own journey, because it's not random that I do what I do for a living. I don't think it ever is. And I fit into this category myself so well. So when I was very young, my sort of earliest memories of myself was I was very chatty, and we would go on holiday and I would literally talk to anyone that would talk to me. I would go and stand in front of people I mean, I was very young, by the way, so it wasn't like last year. I would go and stand in front of any, people, and then I would like smile at them, and I might say hello, and then I would like almost like make people talk to me and make people talk to me. And then at some point, I would say when the ego starts to really be formed around sort of 6, 7 kind of age, the fears started to kind of take hold. So I started to shut my voice down. Now, I wasn't conscious of this at the time. Obviously, as a 7-year-old, I just thought this was how life was. But I noticed my voice started to shut down. I started to feel very criticized when I spoke because I was the youngest female in the family. Well, I was the youngest in the family, and I was female. I still am female. And I used to get told all the time, I'm just like a silly little girl. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just really young and really little. And so I learned to sort of stop expressing myself. I learned to shut my voice down, for want of a better word. And I became very anxious about speaking. And I remember many, many occasions, particularly at school and at university, where I didn't say anything. I would only speak if I had to speak. If they asked someone to go up or does anyone have any questions, I would never put my hand up. I would never say anything. And so people would have perceived me to be really quiet. But it was because it was a kind of, I'd learnt through my upbringing, something had shifted from being that little cute little 5-year-old to now being an 8, 9, 10-year-old, that it just wasn't safe for me to speak anymore. And so I started to shut my voice down. And it really impacted me. I mean, particularly as a teenager, I really felt impacted by this, even into my early kind of career. So before I started doing all of this work, I used to work in the corporate world for the first couple of years, sort of out of university. And even then, I didn't really say very much. I was very afraid to express my opinion. I was very afraid to speak up. I let people walk all over me. I let people, I would argue, bully me. I just didn't have, I didn't have a voice. This was the irony. And this is why I'm so passionate about this. I was singing, yes, I've always sung, but to me, singing was something different. And I've thought about this a lot. If you're someone that sings, singing felt safe to me. No one could touch me when I sang. And I knew I could sing. But speaking felt very unsafe. So this went on for quite some time. It probably did improve a little bit because I was just a bit older. But I would say it really drove my life. It drove the kind of career, coming back to this, it drove the kind of career I picked. I was working very much flying under the radar in the corporate world. I didn't want to be noticed. I didn't want to have to speak. I didn't want to have anyone to see me. I just wanted other people to have all the responsibility and to lead, etc. And it's like now I've gone from one extreme to the other, from hiding in this kind of little corporate job to now running my own business and speaking about speaking and standing on stages and speaking. And the only reason I could do this was because of all of the inner work that I've done around exploring my shadow and looking at how this was really driving my voice, my career, and even the kind of relationships I picked. I would always pick men that were very domineering and aggressive, again, because I didn't have a voice. I did have a voice, but I'd learned to push it away. And this is what I mean by it's really limiting. So yes, it felt safe to my ego to be in this job, but it was killing my soul. It was like literally I was dying every day I went into work. No disrespect to anyone that might be watching this that worked with me in those, because I used to work in advertising and marketing, but it was in a job where I could kind of hide, and it was just killing me slowly. And I just felt like it's interesting because I look back now. I think at the time I was able to push it away quite well. But now I look back and I realize how monumentally unhappy I was in those kinds of jobs, and also just in the kinds of relationships that I would pick. But my voice just wouldn't express itself. So now I'm coming full circle, coming back to a choice of how you use your voice. I would say I'd say I'm more naturally chatty, but I absolutely can be reserved. Like in certain scenarios, if you were to meet me, you'd be like, Anuska's really quiet. But in other scenarios, you'd be like, Anuska doesn't shut up. So it really depends on where you meet me. And some people are really surprised if they've met me in a quiet environment and then they see me singing on stage and speaking. They're like, I can't believe this is the same person. So it really depends. But my point is, this is where you want to get to, that it's a choice. You are choosing how you use your voice. So if you want to be chatty and gregarious and more extroverted, then you can be. But if you don't want to be, then you don't feel any shame around being quiet. I used to feel shame around being quiet. I used to feel like there was something wrong with me if I was quiet, but at the same time, I just felt like there was this like break on my voice. So I felt very trapped because my true voice, my authentic voice, was expressive, was chatty. But I would argue the authentic voice in everyone is a bit of both. We're all introverts and extroverts. We can all be chatty, we can all be reserved. And so this is where the integration work comes in. This is where the shadow work comes in. Because what you heavily identify with as being who you are, so let's say in this case, I'm reserved, the opposite is in your shadow. The talkative person is in your shadow. And if you don't integrate it, if you don't look at it, examine it, bring it to consciousness and integrate it, then you are always going to be limited, like I felt for a long time, because I had to really be okay with being heard. I'd made being heard being really wrong, because for me, it felt very unsafe and very dangerous, because I felt like I got a lot of criticism and shame and judgment when I did speak up. So this is why I'm so passionate about this. So I really want you to start to think about this. What do I heavily identify with? And then the opposite is what you're pushing away. And you have to start to integrate it. This is what I do with private clients. It's very difficult to do by yourself, I should add. I've worked with private coaches and Jungian psychologists for probably about 8 years now to do this integration work. I mean, it's never done, by the way. I'll be doing this till the day I die, but it's just a sort of a gradual peeling back of the layers of the onion. But it's very difficult to do by yourself because the ego wants you to stay the same. Your ego is committed to you staying reserved or staying talkative or whatever. It wants you to stay in the status quo. So that's the first big piece, why you want to really look at this. The second piece is, as an underdoer, as a vocal underdoer, if your voice is on the more reserved end, you've probably heard this expression, if you don't use it, you lose it. So any muscle in the body, if you don't use it, it starts to atrophy. And it's the same with the voice. So as I said, you might be one of these small percentage of people who have a highly trained voice but don't speak very much, and that's fine. But I think for most people that fall into this category, they've got no training with their voice and they don't speak very much. And so what happens, as I said, is the muscles become weak, underutilized, underconditioned. And then when you do speak, it just becomes really difficult. So that's what you really need to work on. So what's the solution then? So first of all, you need to train your voice. So whether you are at the talkative end and you're using your voice a lot, I've also worked with lots of teachers and public speakers and things like that. People that do use their voice, singers, of course, I'm also a singing teacher, singers as well, that have high vocal use, volume, dynamics, etc. Or whether you're someone that doesn't use your voice that well. You want to know that when you open your mouth, you have your voice working as efficiently and effortlessly and freely and powerfully as possible. And I just don't think you're going to know that by yourself. I think anyone that you see that uses their voice really well has had training, even if it's from a family member that perhaps was a singer or a voice coach or something. But most, I always say everyone, anyone that you perceive uses their voice really well has had some kind of training. So you need to train your voice. You need to learn how to efficiently use your voice. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is what I've been talking about here is you have to examine the narrative around your voice. What am I attached to? What's the identity that I'm attached to? And what's my fear of letting go of that identity? But also, what would open up for me, like with me, with my work? Like, I just had all these excuses why I couldn't do what I'm doing now for years. And I felt like I had to hide in this job in the corporate world because it felt safe. And in many ways it was safe because no one knew I was even there. But what would open up for you if you could integrate this other side? So if you're very reserved, what would open up for you if you could integrate a little bit more extroversion, a bit more gregariousness in your voice, a bit more animation, a bit more melody? What would open up for you? What different choices might you make? Even if you stay in the same job, like this lady I was telling you about, the engineer, she's still an engineer, but she just broadened what she allowed herself to do. So now she's just putting herself out there more. She's not hiding behind a desk all day so much. And I think she wanted that. Her ego was like, no, stay in your comfort zone. But there was a part of her that was really craving for something more, which is why she sought me out in the first place. So if you are craving for something more, if this has resonated with you on any level, whether, I mean, and again, there's no right or wrong, whatever side of the fence you feel you are identified with, and you want to kind of break free from these mental prisons, then this is why my voice coaching is so profound. Because yes, I can give you the physical voice training. Yes, we can do the vocal technique and the voice physiology and all of that stuff, all of that good stuff. But more importantly, you're going to understand why your voice is the way it is and how you can then begin to integrate the aspects that are going to allow your voice to open up more, which probably right now feel quite unsafe. So if you're interested in a full coaching program, the minimum I work with people is 3 months. And you can book a free 30-minute voice consult if you're ready for a bigger transformation. And, you know, a lot of people I work with for a year and a half, because we're doing deeper shadow work as well as voice training. If you just want to have an experience of what's possible with your voice, you can also just book a 60-minute private voice session with me. And then if you choose to continue to something beyond that, then you actually get that complimentary. So it really depends on where you're at. But if you're like, no, this is the year, I need to do something about this. I'm fed up with feeling like miserable in my job, or I'm fed up with feeling like I can't speak up like I did for years, like I don't have a voice, I'm scared to say anything, then I can help you. This is deep. This is beyond quick tips. This is beyond fixing your voice. We're not fixing your voice. We're freeing your voice. So do get in contact with me. Leave a comment below if you have any questions. Book a session if you are ready for this deeper approach to vocal transformation. And I would argue it's not just your voice. Everything changes. Your career, your relationships, just what you attract into your life changes. It's like a domino effect on your whole life, because actually you use your voice in every area of your life. It's not just contained to a presentation. You know, even speaking to your partner, your pets, your children, your friends, your colleagues, you take your voice everywhere you go. So thank you so much. And I hope that you found this really useful. Do leave me a comment if you enjoyed it. Do like the video if you enjoyed it as well. And I hope to see some of you very, very soon. Have a good day.